Weird ports have become a bit of a staple on my channel. These ports often reveal things about our favorite games that we would have never even imagined. Well, today, I've got another weird console port of one of the most beloved games on PC of all time. Let me give you a couple hints on which game it is. First, it was ported to the Nintendo 64. And second, it featured a commercial with Saddam freaking Hussein.
To win at galactic warfare takes risk, determination, and most of all, the strategic mind of a brilliant military genius.
I lose again!
StarCraft, all-out war on N64.
Loser!
Rated T.
Yeah, so apparently that's a thing. Released only a year and a half after Brood War, StarCraft 64 is one of the greatest ports of all time. StarCraft 64 is verbatim the PC experience, although with some clunky controls attached on the Nintendo 64 controller. This is the first time I played a console port of an RTS game, and I felt like I was getting the exact same experience that I would have got playing on PC. If we are being honest here though, having the same experience on PC and console is definitely a double-edged sword. After about an hour of playing StarCraft 64 with a Nintendo 64 controller, I began to get really friggin' annoyed. But of course, the console experience is going to be inferior if you're using a controller on a one-to-one port of an RTS game, but as somebody who's played StarCraft a lot on the computer, I would compare using the Nintendo 64 controller to play StarCraft is like trying to run underwater. It just feels awful. Now, with all that being said, I want to reiterate how good of a port this game actually is. It's a direct port of StarCraft to the Nintendo 64. Basically, nothing's missing. It's mind-blowing. And yeah, if you couldn't have guessed, you need the expansion pack to play Brood War. Who could have guessed that? So I'm sure most of you that are watching this video, you've probably played StarCraft before. If not StarCraft 1, probably StarCraft 2. And if you haven't, basically you gather resources, and then you build an army, and then you kill each other. It's really fun stuff. It's good stuff. And if you haven't played them, you really should. In my opinion, StarCraft 1 and 2 are everything an RTS game should be. Or maybe that's just my rose-tinted glasses, but I love those games, so you guys should play them. Why I'm bringing up the gameplay is that there are some changes to the gameplay in this version of StarCraft. It's not identical to Brood War. The best change, in my opinion, is that workers automatically start mining minerals when they're created. Having to manually assign workers even in the PC version is really terrible game design. And imagine having to do that with a Nintendo 64 controller feeling like you're walking underwater. Terrible, terrible, terrible. They also increased the unit selection cap from 12 to 18, again making the game more friendly to play with a controller. Both of these changes have removed quite a lot of meaningless and pointless inputs. Of course, there's way more changes in the game itself, such as cheat codes being turned into in-game objects you find, an exclusive secret level, missing voice acting in mission briefing, and limitations to all the in-game audio such as removed voice lines when you click the characters, and then cinematics have been pretty much entirely removed to save space on the cartridge. So this means if you're experiencing the campaign for the first time, you should definitely go play it on the computer, otherwise you're missing out on pretty much all the cinematics and voice acting. While they've replaced the voice acting with a text alternative, a lot of the text has been shortened. The only surviving cinematic is the opening cinematic. The rest have all been changed into these weird, awful slideshows. And if we're being honest, the limitations are quite disappointing, seeing as Resident Evil 2 for the Nintendo 64 had full motion videos. But at least the entirety of StarCraft is untouched gameplay-wise, so it's not all bad. The game's mostly there. While I do have mostly high praise for this game being such a faithful port, where this port of StarCraft falls flat on its face is in terms of performance. The performance once you have a few units going really starts to tank, and while it doesn't completely ruin the experience, it isn't exactly pleasant. Just look at one of the later missions without anything spawned. This is just starting the mission. It's practically a slideshow, man. The multiplayer mode has simply been called 2-player, as the game has been limited to 2-player split screen. I'm sure they experimented with 4-player split screen, but the game already struggles with one player as is. You're able to access most of the multiplayer modes here as well as scenarios. You've got melee, free-for-all, allied melee, team melee, and scenario. Any other modes are not present in StarCraft 64. In these various game modes, you're at the most basic level either working together or fighting each other. Here's the weird thing though. Team Melee on the computer is actually now called Allied Melee on StarCraft 64. Basically, you're on a team and you're fighting another team, right? Well, there's Team Melee on StarCraft 64, and it's actually an earlier version of the Archon mode from StarCraft 2. For the uninitiated, the Archon mode is essentially 2 players controlling one team, leaving one player to handle base building and the other to handle fighting. For the most part, it's considered a teaching tool on StarCraft 2. It's a funny little game mode, and I'm glad they added it. Here's the thing though, this game mode gets a little weird. You're able to select different races while being on the same team while using the same starting building. So, for example, one of you could pick Terran, one could pick Protoss. But then, as the Protoss workers, you're still bringing your minerals back to a command center that the Terrans use. It is really weird. Efficiency-wise, when you're playing Allied Melee, picking 2 separate races but working on one team like that is a terrible idea. This is because you actually need to build different buildings and get different upgrades to progress and become stronger. But, you know, it's a really cool feature, dude. Plus, talking about efficiency is nonsense anyway. If you're playing StarCraft 64, you're probably playing for fun in the first place. There also appears to be some new scenarios in the game that are N64 exclusive. There's one called Guardians, where you both have indestructible bases and you have to find a way to destroy the other person's base. Zerg Troopers, where you're doing a final stand together trying to survive waves, and whoever gets the most kills and survives wins. Then there's this game mode called Rage, where you go and wreak havoc on a town and whoever has the most buildings destroyed wins. Of course, you've also got some classic game modes like King of the Hill or Zerg Roundup. In Zerg Roundup, you play as cowboys corralling a bunch of Zerglings into their cage. There's just a lot of silly fun to be had in this game. It's a great time. Though I will warn you, some cool scenarios like Race are missing. You know what they did add though? A fully featured co-op mission with a briefing screen we've never seen before, as well as in-game dialogue we've never read or heard. It's pretty nuts that they added an entire story co-op mission to this friggin' game. You know, they should have just made the whole campaign co-op at that point. Like, why not? It could have just been in the Archon mode format where it's 2 people controlling one game. I don't see why they didn't do it. They proved it was possible with this mission right here. And before I forget, this bonus exclusive mission for the Nintendo 64 is called Resurrection 4. Sadly, the multiplayer in StarCraft 64 is limited to 2 human players only and 4 AI players max. That's a total of 6 people in the game. Despite the game listing that you can start with 8 slots when you're picking the map, it just doesn't work like that. You also don't even seem to be able to pick a color or assign teams. Such weird small things to remove from the game. Because of this, the experience does feel a little lackluster, but everything is mostly there. And if you don't have a friend to play split screen with, you can still play some single player scenarios as well as custom scenarios. But you're limited to free-for-all and melee. While I was researching this part of the video, I found some of the maps were actually removed from StarCraft 64, and there were also a few StarCraft 64 exclusive maps added, like Monkey Business, Spaced Out, and Out of Time. It pays to do your own research, folks. Here's a mostly complete list of the differences between StarCraft 64 and its PC counterpart. One of the most interesting tidbits here I find is that all races are limited to 2 musical tracks only, each race gaining 1 track from StarCraft and 1 from Brood War. The briefing room music is also something that's interesting. It is unique to StarCraft 64. Anyhow, feel free to pause and look over these, they're pretty interesting. So what do you think of StarCraft 64? Is it something you're willing to try out? To be honest with you guys, I think it's worth it. Split screen StarCraft sounds like a great time. Well, that's all for this video, my friends. Like, comment, and subscribe, it helps out the channel a lot, and I would appreciate it greatly. Have a good one.